They say you get used to pain if it happens often enough. But that's a lie. I felt every single time. The bathroom light above the mirror flickered like it couldn't decide if I deserved to be seen tonight. And I stood there anyway, staring at a version of myself I barely recognized, fingertips brushing lightly over the fading marks along my collarbone, not to check if they hurt, but to remind myself I was still here, still breathing, still standing in a world that kept asking me to break quietly. My name is Lily Monroe, and if you saw me at the Amber Room on a Friday night, you'd think I had it all together. The steady hands balancing trays, the polite smile, the soft "how are you tonight?" delivered like I meant it. But the truth was, every shift felt like a performance, every laugh rehearsed, every movement calculated so no one would notice the way I flinched at sudden noise or the way my sleeves never rolled up, even when the bar got too hot to breathe. The music was loud enough to drown out thoughts, low bass pulsing through the floor like a second heartbeat, and I leaned into it, letting it carry me from table to table, because as long as I was moving, I didn't have to think about going home. Home. The word sat heavy in my chest, like something I used to believe in but couldn't anymore. I wiped down the counter, eyes fixed on the polished wood, counting the seconds between breaths the way I'd learned to do on the worst nights, when silence felt dangerous and stillness felt like surrender. "Lily, table 6. Marco called from across the bar, his voice cutting through the haze, and I nodded, grabbing 2 glasses before heading over, my smile already in place before I even reached them. That's when the door opened. It wasn't loud. It didn't slam. But something shifted, subtle and immediate, like the air itself pulled tighter, conversations dipping just slightly, not stopping, never that obvious, but enough that you felt it if you were paying attention. I didn't look up right away. I had learned not to. People like that didn't need your eyes to know they were being watched. Still, curiosity is a dangerous thing, and mine had always been worse than most. So I glanced. Just once. And that was enough. He didn't look like anyone else in the room. Not because he tried to stand out, but because he didn't need to. Dark suit, perfectly fitted, not flashy, not loud, just precise. Like everything about him had been chosen with intention. He moved slowly, not in a hurry, as if time adjusted itself to him instead of the other way around. Men stepped aside without being asked. Staff straightened without realizing why. And me? I forgot how to breathe for a second too long. I looked down quickly, focusing on the glasses in my hand, but my fingers betrayed me, trembling just enough that one of them tapped softly against the other, a faint sound that felt louder than it should have. "You're fine?" I whispered under my breath, the same words I'd been telling myself for months, maybe longer, even when I knew they weren't true. I set the drinks down at table 6, forcing my attention back where it belonged, but I could feel it. The weight of something unseen, something watching. Not the way men usually looked at me. Not curiosity. Not desire. Something else. Something sharper. I turned, just slightly, enough to catch a glimpse again, and this time, his eyes were already on me. Not scanning. Not guessing. Knowing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something unfamiliar cut through the fear I carried every night. Not safety. Not yet. But something close enough to make my chest tighten. Like maybe, just maybe, someone had finally noticed. I should have looked away, but I did not. And that was my first mistake, because once you are seen like that, truly seen, there is no pretending you are invisible anymore. And invisibility had been my safest place for a very long time. I turned back to the bar quickly, forcing my hands to move, to grab a towel, to wipe a surface that was already clean, anything to ground myself in something normal, something small, something that did not involve the way my pulse had suddenly picked up or the strange weight sitting just beneath my ribs. People like him did not notice people like me, not unless there was a reason, and I had spent years making sure I was never a reason. "You missed a spot," Marco muttered as he passed by, nodding toward the counter, and I blinked, realizing I had been wiping the same circle for too long, my thoughts drifting somewhere dangerous. "Sorry," I said softly, adjusting my grip, focusing on the rhythm of the cloth against the wood, back and forth, steady, controlled, predictable. Predictable was safe. I stayed there longer than I needed to, hoping the moment would pass, that whatever that look had been would dissolve into nothing, just another strange feeling I could ignore, but the air still felt different, charged in a way I could not explain. Then I heard it. Water. The voice was low, calm, not raised, not demanding, but it cut through everything anyway, like the room adjusted itself to make space for it. I froze for half a second before turning, already knowing who it was without needing to confirm it. And when I looked up, he was closer now, seated at the far end of the bar, one arm resting lightly against the polished surface, posture relaxed but deliberate, like even stillness was a choice he made carefully. I nodded, stepping forward, reaching for a clean glass, my fingers steady this time because I forced them to be, because losing control here was not an option. I filled the glass slowly, aware of every second stretching out, aware of the distance closing as I walked toward him, aware of the way my breath felt just a little too shallow. When I set the glass down in front of him, I kept my eyes on it, on the water, on anything except him. "Here you go," I said, my voice even, practiced, the same tone I used with everyone else. For a moment, there was silence. Not empty, not awkward, just intentional. Then, "What happened to your wrist?" It was not a question. It sounded like one, but it was not. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, my hand instinctively pulling back, sleeve shifting just enough to reveal what I had been so careful to hide, a faint discoloration that should have been invisible under the dim lighting, but somehow was not to him. "Nothing," I said immediately, too quickly, the word automatic, rehearsed, my gaze lifting just long enough to meet his before dropping again. I bumped into something. The lie sat between us, thin and fragile, and I knew he could see right through it. His expression did not change, not noticeably, but something in his eyes sharpened, not anger, not pity, something quieter, more dangerous, like a decision being made in real time. He reached for the glass, fingers brushing against the rim, but he did not drink. "Be careful," he said finally, his voice softer now, almost thoughtful, but there was something underneath it, something that made my chest tighten in a way I could not explain. Some things leave marks longer than they should. I swallowed, nodding once, because I did not know what else to do, because engaging further felt like stepping into something I was not prepared to face. "I will," I replied, though we both knew that was not how this worked, not really. I turned away before he could say anything else, before I could say something I would regret, moving back toward the other end of the bar, back into the noise and the light and the illusion of normalcy, but the feeling did not leave. It stayed with me, quiet and persistent, like a shadow I could not shake. And for the rest of the night, no matter how busy it got, no matter how many orders I filled or tables I served, I could feel it there, steady and unrelenting. He was still watching. And somehow, for the first time in a long time, that terrified me a little less than it should have. I kept my distance after that, not because he told me to, not because anyone warned me, but because instinct whispered something I had learned to trust in the worst ways, that getting too close to anything powerful always came with a cost, and I had already paid more than I could afford. The rest of my shift blurred into movement and noise, orders called out, glasses clinking, laughter rising and falling in waves that never quite reached me, because part of me stayed aware of him, like my body had adjusted to a new center of gravity without asking my permission. I did not look at him again directly, not once, but I knew where he was. I knew when he shifted in his seat. I knew when his glass remained untouched for too long, and I knew when the room subtly bent around him like he was not just a man, but something heavier, something that altered the space simply by existing in it. By the time my shift ended, my feet ached in that familiar, dull way, the kind that came from hours on hard floors and pretending nothing else hurt more, and I moved quickly, grabbing my bag from the back room, slipping my jacket over my shoulders, already preparing myself for the quiet that waited outside, the kind that always felt too loud when you knew what came next. "You heading out?" Maria asked as she tied her apron, her eyes scanning my face the way people did when they sensed something but did not know what to call it. "Yeah," I said, forcing a small smile, adjusting the strap of my bag, keeping everything light, easy, unremarkable. "See you tomorrow." She nodded, but her gaze lingered for a second longer than usual, like she wanted to ask something she could not quite form, and I turned before she could, before I had to answer anything real. The hallway behind the bar smelled like cleaning solution and stale air, the kind that clung to your clothes long after you left, and I pushed through the back door into the alley, the night air hitting me sharp and cold. making me inhale a little deeper than I had all evening. It was quieter out there, just the distant hum of traffic and the occasional sound of footsteps echoing somewhere beyond the brick walls. And for a second, I let myself stand still, just long enough to feel it, the space, the distance, the brief illusion of being alone. Then I started walking. My car was 3 blocks away, parked under a flickering streetlight that never quite stayed on long enough to feel reliable, and I kept my head down, hands tucked into my jacket pockets, counting my steps without realizing it. 1, 2, 3, the rhythm steady, grounding, familiar. Halfway down the second block, I felt it again. That shift. Subtle. Immediate. Like something in the air changed direction. I slowed without meaning to, my shoulders tightening just slightly, my breath catching in a way I hated because it reminded me of nights I tried not to remember. You are fine, I told myself, the words quieter now, less convincing, but still there. You are fine. The sound of a car door closing echoed behind me. Not close, but not far either, and I resisted the urge to turn around, because looking made things real, and sometimes pretending was the only thing that got me through the next step. I kept walking, faster now, the distance to my car shrinking, the keys already in my hand, fingers curling around them like they could anchor me to something solid. Then a voice, calm and unmistakable, cut through the night. Lily. I stopped. I did not want to, but I did. Slowly, carefully, I turned, my breath shallow, my heart doing that uneven thing I could not control. And there he was, standing a few feet away, not rushed, not out of place, like he had always been part of this moment, and I was the one catching up. After that, not because I agreed, but because something in his tone made arguing feel pointless, like trying to push against a wall that had already decided it would not move, and I was too tired to fight things that did not bend. I turned back toward my car, each step measured, aware of him behind me without needing to look, aware of the quiet space he filled even when he said nothing at all. The streetlight above flickered again, casting brief shadows that stretched and disappeared across the pavement, and I focused on that instead of the strange sense of being followed without being chased, protected without being asked. When I reached my car, I unlocked it quickly, the familiar click sounding louder than it should have, and I paused with my hand on the door handle, hesitating for just a second before glancing back. He was still there, exactly where I had left him, not closer, not farther, just watching, his posture relaxed but deliberate, like distance was something he chose, not something he was forced into. Our eyes met again, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then I got into the car and closed the door, the sound sealing me inside my own small space, my breath finally releasing in a slow, controlled exhale. I started the engine, the familiar hum grounding me, and I told myself that was it. That whatever this was, it ended here, that I would drive home, walk inside, lock the door, and everything would return to the way it had always been. Predictable, contained, manageable. I pulled away from the curb, checking the mirror out of habit more than concern, and for a brief second, I saw him still standing there under the flickering light, unmoving, like a fixed point in a world that never stayed still long enough to trust. Then he disappeared from view as I turned the corner. The drive home was quiet, the city thinning out the farther I went, streetlights spaced wider, buildings lower, the noise fading into something distant and almost forgettable. I kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, forcing my thoughts into neat, controlled lines, refusing to let them circle back to him, to the way he looked at me, to the way his words had settled somewhere, deeper than they should have. You are fine, I repeated, softer now, like I was reminding myself instead of convincing. You are fine. My apartment building came into view 10 minutes later, the same worn brick, the same dim entrance light that buzzed faintly when it flickered on, the same narrow steps that led to a place that was supposed to feel like mine, but never quite did. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a second longer than necessary, my hands still resting on the steering wheel, listening to the silence settle around me. This was the part one always dreaded, the space between arriving and going inside, the moment where everything felt uncertain, where I had to decide whether tonight would be quiet or something else entirely. I grabbed my bag, stepped out, and locked the car behind me, the click echoing slightly in the empty lot. The air felt colder here, heavier, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me as I moved toward the entrance, my steps slower now, cautious in a way I could not fully explain. The hallway inside was dim, the overhead light flickering in that same unreliable rhythm, and I climbed the stairs quietly, instinct guiding me to move without sound, to listen between each step, to notice anything out of place. When I reached my door, I paused, just for a second, listening. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Just silence. I exhaled slowly, reaching for my keys, unlocking the door, and stepping inside, closing it behind me with a soft click. For a moment, everything was still. Safe. Or at least it felt that way. I leaned back against the door, eyes closing briefly, letting the tension drain from my shoulders, telling myself I had made it through another night. But as I opened my eyes, something shifted. Not loud, not obvious, just enough. The kind of feeling that creeps in before your mind can catch up, the kind that tells you something is different even when everything looks the same. And for the first time, the thought crossed my mind without warning, without permission. Maybe I was not alone in the way I thought I was. Not anymore. The silence in my apartment never felt empty. It felt watchful, like the walls had learned too much and decided to keep it. And as I stood there with my back against the door, I listened harder than I should have, straining for something I could name, something I could fight, but all I found was that same quiet that always came before everything changed. I pushed myself off the door slowly, forcing my legs to move, to carry me into the small living room that barely held more than a worn couch and a narrow table, the kind of place that looked temporary even after years of staying. My bag slid from my shoulder onto the table with a soft thud, and I moved automatically, checking the window, the corners, the spaces that had taught me how to scan without thinking, how to exist without ever fully relaxing. Everything looked the same, exactly the same, and somehow that made it worse than a breath, but it filled the room anyway, hanging in the air like something fragile that could break if I waited too long. Nothing answered. The apartment remained still, unchanged, the same furniture, the same shadows, the same quiet that now felt heavier than before. I took a step forward, then another, moving carefully, listening between each movement, my heartbeat loud enough to make everything else feel distant. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just the building settling, the pipes, the neighbors, anything but what my mind wanted to believe. I forced myself to keep going, to check the bedroom, to open the door slowly, the hinge creaking just slightly as it always did, and I glanced inside, scanning quickly, efficiently. Empty, just like it should be. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding, tension easing just a fraction, enough to make me feel almost foolish for reacting this way, almost ready to laugh it off and call it exhaustion. But then I noticed it. Something small, something easy to miss if you were not looking closely. The window. It was closed. It always was. But the curtain, it was not where I left it. It had shifted, just slightly, like someone had moved past it without thinking, like something had brushed against it and changed its place in a way that could not be undone. My chest tightened again, sharper this time, my mind racing through possibilities I did not want to consider, because once you name something like that, it becomes real, and real things do not disappear when you ask them to. I stepped back slowly, my fingers curling instinctively around nothing, searching for something to hold on to, something solid, something safe. And then, before I could move again, before I could decide what came next, a voice spoke from behind me, calm, steady, and far too close. "You should lock your windows, Lily." I froze. Completely. Every thought, every movement, every breath suspended in a single moment that stretched longer than it should have. Because I knew that voice. I had heard it once before. And somehow, that made it more terrifying and less at the same time. I did not turn around right away, not because I was brave, but because something in me understood that the moment I moved, everything would shift into something I could not control, and for a few seconds longer, I wanted to stay exactly where I was, suspended between fear and something I could not quite define. My breath came shallow, barely there, my fingers tightening at my sides as I forced myself to think, to process, to make sense of how he could be here, inside a space that was supposed to be mine, a space no one else crossed without permission. Slowly, carefully, I turned. He stood a few feet behind me, just inside the edge of the living room. Not hidden, not looming, simply there. like he had always belonged in the shadows of the place I had tried so hard to keep separate from everything else. The light from the kitchen caught part of his face, leaving the rest in shadow, but his eyes were clear, steady, watching me with that same quiet focus that had unsettled me all night. I should have panicked. I should have yelled, told him to leave, called someone, done something loud and desperate and immediate. But I did none of that. Instead, I just looked at him, my heart still racing, my mind catching up in slow, uneven steps. "How did you get in here?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected, not accusing, just searching. He did not answer right away. His gaze flicked briefly toward the window, then back to me, like the explanation was already obvious and did not need words. "It was not secure," he said finally, his tone calm, measured, as if we were discussing something simple, something ordinary. "It should be." I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding, my shoulders tightening again, not in fear this time, but something sharper, something closer to frustration. "That does not give you the right to just walk in," I said, the words steadier now, stronger, because anger was easier to hold onto than confusion. He studied me for a moment, silent, his expression unchanged, but something in his eyes shifted, not defensive, not dismissive, just considering. "No," he said quietly. "It does not." The agreement caught me off guard, stealing the next words before I could form them, leaving a brief, unexpected silence between us that felt heavier than anything he could have argued. I swallowed, stepping back slightly, putting distance between us that felt necessary even if it did not feel entirely effective. "Then why are you here?" I asked, softer now, because the question mattered more than the anger. He did not move closer, did not try to close the space I created, and that alone changed something I could not fully explain, a small shift that made the air feel less tight, less immediate. "Because you are not safe," he said, the words simple, direct, and far too certain. I let out a small, humorless breath, shaking my head slightly, because I had heard that before, in different ways, from different people, none of them meaning it the way it sounded. "You do not even know me," I replied, my voice steady but quieter now, like I was not entirely sure I believed my own defense. "I know enough," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that made my chest tighten again. Not fear, not entirely. Something deeper, something that reached past the surface and settled somewhere I had kept locked for a long time. I crossed my arms instinctively, holding myself together in a way that felt familiar, controlled. "You do not get to decide that?" I said, but the words felt weaker than they should have, like they were missing something important. He did not argue. He did not push. He just looked at me, that same steady, unyielding focus, like he was waiting for something I had not said yet. Then, after a moment, he spoke again, his voice lower now, quieter, but somehow heavier than before. "You flinch at sounds that are not there," he said. "You scan every room before you step inside it. You lie about things that leave marks." Each word landed carefully, not harsh, not cruel, just precise, like he was naming truths I had never spoken out loud. I froze, my breath catching, my mind scrambling for a response, for a denial, for anything that would put distance between me and what he was seeing. But nothing came, because he was not wrong, and we both knew it. The silence stretched again, longer this time, heavier, and for the first time since he stepped into my apartment, I felt something shift completely, something I could not ignore anymore. Not fear, not anger, something far more dangerous. The realization that he was not guessing. He was paying attention, and I did not know what to do with that. I should have told him to leave after that. I should have forced the words out, drawn a line, reclaimed whatever control I still had left in a life that rarely gave me any. But the truth was, I did not move, not right away, because something in what he said had settled too deeply to ignore, and I hated how accurate it felt, how easily he had stepped past the version of me I showed the world and seen what I spent so much effort hiding. "You do not know everything," I said finally, my voice quieter now, less defensive, because denying it completely felt pointless when he had already named too much. His gaze did not waver, but he did not argue either, and that silence felt intentional, like he was giving me space to fill it if I chose to, like he was waiting to see what I would do when I was not being pushed. I looked away first, breaking the tension, my eyes dropping to the floor as I tried to steady my breathing, tried to pull myself back into something familiar, something controlled. You cannot just come into my life and decide what is safe for me. I added, softer this time, not as sharp, because part of me already knew this was not about control the way I was used to understanding it. That is not what I am doing, he replied, his voice calm, even, but there was a quiet certainty underneath it that made the words feel heavier than they should have. I let out a small breath, shaking my head slightly, because I did not know how to argue with something that did not sound like a threat, did not feel like pressure, but still carried weight I could not ignore. Then what are you doing? I asked, lifting my eyes back to his, needing an answer even if I was not sure I wanted one. He held my gaze for a moment, something unreadable passing through his expression before it settled again into that same composed stillness. I am removing variables, he said simply. The words did not make sense at first, not in a way that connected to me, and I frowned slightly, confusion cutting through the tension that had been building since he spoke. Variables, I repeated, the word feeling out of place in a conversation that had already crossed too many boundaries. He nodded once, slow, deliberate. Things that create risk, he clarified, his tone unchanged, as if this was the most logical explanation in the world. Things that do not need to be there. A chill moved through me, not sharp, not immediate, but steady, spreading in a way I could not quite stop, because I understood what he was implying without him having to say it directly, and that understanding brought something else with it, something I was not ready to face. You cannot just decide that, I said, my voice quieter now, almost uncertain, because part of me knew he probably could. He did not respond right away, and that silence said more than any argument could have, because it was not defensive, not dismissive, just accepting. I took a step back again, creating more distance, needing space to think, to breathe, to remind myself where I was, who I was, what I could still control. This is not your problem, I added, the words coming out softer than I intended, because they felt less like a boundary and more like something I had told myself too many times to count. His eyes shifted slightly at that, something subtle but noticeable, like the statement had been noted and filed away rather than challenged. It is now, he said quietly. The certainty in his voice should have scared me more than it did, should have made me push back harder, should have made me demand that he leave and never come back. But instead, something inside me reacted differently, something I did not trust, something that felt dangerously close to relief. I crossed my arms tighter, holding onto myself like that would keep everything in place. You do not even know what you are stepping into, I said, because if he understood, really understood, he would walk away, he would leave this alone, he would not stand here like it was something he could fix. His expression did not change, but his answer came without hesitation. I know. Enough, he repeated, the same words as before, but this time they carried more weight, more intention, like he had already decided what came next and was simply waiting for the moment to act on it. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier, not because he moved, but because something had shifted between us, something that made it impossible to pretend this was a simple conversation anymore. And as I stood there, caught between pushing him away and asking him to stay, I realized something I was not ready to admit out loud. For the first time in a long time, I was not just afraid of what might happen next. I was afraid of how much I wanted him to be right. I did not realize how quiet the room had become until I noticed my own breathing again, uneven, too loud in the space between us, like the silence had grown thick enough to press against my chest and make every small movement feel amplified. I shifted my weight slightly, my arms still crossed, still holding onto myself like that was the only thing keeping me grounded, but it was not working the way it used to, not with him standing there, not with the way his presence seemed to change the rules of everything I had relied on to stay in control. You cannot fix this, I said, the words coming out softer than I intended, almost tired, because it felt like something I had been repeating for so long it had lost its meaning. Whatever you think you see, whatever you think you understand, it is not that simple. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. He just listened, and somehow that made it harder to keep talking, harder to hide behind the usual defenses that had always worked before. I let out a slow breath, my gaze dropping again, searching for something neutral to focus on, something that would not pull me back into the weight of his attention. People do not just remove things from other people's lives, I added, quieter now, more to myself than to him. That is not how it works. The words lingered in the air, fragile and uncertain, and for a moment, I almost believed them again. Almost. Then he moved. Not closer, not in a way that felt threatening, just a small shift, a step that brought him slightly into the light, enough that I could see his expression more clearly, enough that the shadows no longer hid the intent in his eyes. "It is," he said calmly. Two simple words. No emphasis. No force. Just certainty. I looked up at him again, my chest tightening, because it was not the words that unsettled me. It was the way he believed them, completely, without hesitation, like the world bent differently for him than it did for everyone else. "Not for people like me," I replied, the truth slipping out before I could stop it, before I could reshape it into something safer. His gaze sharpened slightly at that, not in judgment, not in pity, just recognition, like he had been waiting for me to say it out loud. "Especially for people like you," he said. The response hit harder than it should have, not because it was loud or forceful, but because it felt deliberate, like he was pushing against something I had built carefully over time, something that had kept me standing when everything else tried to knock me down. I shook my head, a small, instinctive movement, like I could physically reject the idea before it settled too deep. "You do not understand," I said, my voice tightening now, the edges of frustration finally breaking through the quiet restraint I had been holding on to. "You walk into this like it is something you can control, like it is a situation you can solve, but it is not. It is not clean, it is not simple, and it does not just disappear because you decide it should." The words came faster now, not rushed, but more certain, like I needed him to hear it, needed him to understand why this could not be what he thought it was. He listened to all of it without interruption, without reaction, his expression unchanged in a way that should have made me angrier, but somehow did not. When I finished, the silence returned, heavier than before, stretching between us in a way that made everything feel sharper, more defined. Then he spoke again, his voice lower this time, quieter, but carrying something that made the air feel different the moment the words left his mouth. "You are right," he said. I blinked, the response catching me off guard, pulling me out of the rhythm I had just built. "It is not simple." He paused, just long enough for the words to settle, for me to process them, for the tension to shift slightly in a way I did not expect. "But that does not mean it cannot be changed." I stared at him, my thoughts slowing, the sharp edge of my frustration dulling into something more uncertain, more complicated, because he was not dismissing what I said, he was not minimizing it, he was acknowledging it, and still standing exactly where he had been from the start. That should not have made sense. It should not have mattered. And yet it did. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders lowering just a fraction, not relaxed, not safe, but no longer locked in that same rigid tension. "You do not even know his name," I said finally, the words quieter now, almost testing, because if he knew, if he had somehow already crossed that line too, then this was something else entirely, something I was not prepared to face. His expression did not change, but his answer came without hesitation, steady and precise. "I do not need to." The certainty in those words sent a chill through me, not sharp, not immediate, but deep, settling somewhere I could not ignore. And in that moment, standing in the middle of a space that no longer felt entirely like mine, I understood something I had been trying not to see since the night began. He was not asking for permission. He had already decided what came next, and I did not know if I was more afraid of that, or of what it meant that part of me wanted to believe him. The weight of his words did not fade when the silence returned. It settled, deeper this time, like something had been placed between us that could not be ignored or moved aside, and I stood there trying to decide what it meant, what it changed, what I was supposed to do with a man who spoke like the outcome had already been written somewhere I could not see. I should have told him to leave again, louder this time, stronger, made it clear that whatever control he believed he had did not extend into my life, into my space, into the fragile structure I had built just to survive day to day. But the truth sat heavier than that, pressing against the inside of my chest in a way I could not push away. Because a part of me already knew that what I had built was not safety. It was endurance. And endurance was not the same thing. I looked at him, really looked this time, not just at the sharp lines of his face or the stillness in his posture, but at the way he held himself like nothing in the world could surprise him, like he had seen enough to stop reacting and start deciding instead. And what happens after? I asked quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, because this question mattered more than anything else I had said. If you remove your so-called variables, if everything you think is a risk just disappears, what then? The words hung between us, heavier than before, because this was not about denial anymore, not about pretending nothing was wrong. It was about what came next if something actually changed. He did not answer right away, and for the first time since he stepped into my apartment, I saw something shift in his expression, not uncertainty, not doubt, just consideration, like the question mattered in a way the others had not. Then you choose, he said finally. I frowned slightly, the answer not what I expected, not as simple as I thought it would be. Choose what? His gaze did not leave mine, steady and unwavering, like this part was not negotiable. What your life looks like without it, he replied. The simplicity of it caught me off guard, because it was not a promise, not a command, not something he was taking for himself. It was something he was placing back in my hands, something I had not felt in a very long time. Choice. I let out a slow breath, my shoulders lowering just a fraction more, not relaxed, not safe, but shifting into something else, something unfamiliar. You make it sound easy, I said, quieter now, because I did not have the strength to argue with something that sounded almost possible. He shook his head slightly, a small movement, but enough to change the tone of everything that followed. It is not easy, he said. It is just necessary. The words settled into me in a way I could not ignore, because they did. Not erase what I had been through. They did not pretend it was simple or clean or something that could be fixed overnight. They just acknowledged it, and still moved forward anyway. I looked down for a moment, my thoughts slower now, less defensive, like the walls I had built were not gone, but no longer as rigid as they had been. You do not even know if I want that, I said softly, the truth slipping out before I could stop it, because wanting something different was dangerous. Wanting meant hoping, and hoping meant risking something I was not sure I could survive losing again. You do, he said. The certainty in his voice should have felt like pressure, like control, like something I needed to push back against, but instead it landed differently, quieter, steadier, like he was not telling me something new, just saying something I had been avoiding. I closed my eyes for a brief second, just long enough to feel it, the weight of that truth, the possibility of it, the fear of it. Then I opened them again and met his gaze, and for the first time since he had spoken my name outside, something inside me shifted completely. Not fear, not resistance, something else, something fragile and dangerous and real. If you are wrong, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper now, this does not just go away. He nodded once, like he understood that, like he had already considered it. I am not wrong, he said. And there it was again. That certainty, that decision, that unshakable belief that things could be different whether I was ready for it or not. The room felt smaller and larger at the same time, like everything was closing in and opening up all at once, and I stood there caught in the middle of it, no longer able to pretend this was just a conversation that would end when one of us walked away. Because deep down, somewhere I had tried not to look, I already knew the truth. He did not step into my life to ask for permission. He stepped in to change it. And for the first time, I was not entirely sure I wanted him to leave.